I'm John Paquette. I oversee the solutions team for TIS's US market. Also a former practitioner myself, so I spent 15 years directly in the Treasury space before I made the jump to the tech side. Always love having these conversations about industry topics and some of the challenges our peers are facing. So looking forward to the conversation here today. And so for today, we're going to discuss some of the challenges that small and scaling Treasury teams face as they look to adopt Treasury technology and adopt their and modernize their Treasury operations. So this is a segment that's kind of unique in that historically they've sort of treaded the line around whether or not they actually need technology to support their processes. They're not as complex as a lot of their mid-market or enterprise peers, right? They don't have these complex risk management functions, hedging programs, or a lot of the more complex cash management structures. That's something that you see in a lot of the enterprise level organizations, right? So I kind of characterize their needs as more foundational or sort of core Treasury management, right? So, and also it's a segment that may not have received a lot of attention from tech providers either. And so some of the offerings that are out there in the market might not necessarily be tailored to this sort of small segment of companies, but I know that's a topic we want to discuss a lot more during the course of the conversation here today. Bring in some opinions and some experiences as it relates to that. And so to help me do that, I have two of my colleagues here with me today, John Kane and Said Al-Salah. So welcome guys to the Coffee Talk. Really excited to have you guys here. And maybe each of you guys could do a quick introduction as well, starting with John.
Great, thanks, John. Good morning, everybody. Yeah, my name's John Kane, and I look after group sales for TIS in the US. I worked in the same capacity at Cashforce for a year prior to the acquisition of Cashforce by TIS. But I've spent the last almost 20 years helping corporate treasury teams use technology, from helping them evaluate products in the sales process to implementation and support and customer success. I worked for F Express, if anybody remembers them, Reval, Chatham Financial, and Ion before joining Cashforce and now TIS. So happy to share what I've learned over the years, helping treasury practitioners get the most out of their technology relationships and hopefully reduce the use of spreadsheets.
Thanks, John. Hi, everyone. My name is Said Al-Salah. I'm Director of Customer Success US here at TIS. I've been with TIS for about 2 years. Before that, I spent about 6 years in Treasury advisory consulting, where I first started my career with Deloitte and then EY. During that time, I focused on TMS selections, overall Treasury advisory and TMS implementations, including SAP Treasury, Kyriba, and G Treasury. Saw the need in the payment space and then made the move over to TIS. So really looking forward to today's conversation and sharing from our experience.
All right. Thanks a lot, guys, and welcome again to the Coffee Talk. So maybe I'll set the stage here a little bit, just talking about the specific operational processes we're going to be describing here that are more core to the small treasury organizations out there. So you have things like bank account management, which it still seems like the tool of choice for nearly all organizations, even enterprise level organizations, is still Excel. But if you look towards the small mid-market, sort of segment there, you see Excel almost exclusively being used for things like bank account management, right? Probably number two is cash forecasting, based on survey results we've run and based on, sort of been validated through conversations with prospects and peers. Excel still makes up about a third of the total forecasting market, which is sort of crazy to think about. And if you look at that, the demographic breakdown of that towards small and mid-market organizations, it jumps to almost 40–50%, right? So most of those, nearly half of them, are still using Excel for forecasting processes. And then you have things like cash positioning, kind of fundamental cash reporting, daily cash visibility. That's still really being driven by e-banking portals and a lot of the reports that organizations are pulling down either in PDF form or through Excel and then consolidating that information together, right? To kind of get that picture of the intraday cash position or to develop various kind of ad hoc cash reports, right? So that's still a tool we see and used a lot. And of course, manual payments or even template-based payments or payment uploads. We're seeing a lot of treasury organizations still supporting that process, both manual payments within Treasury and even the broader business AP payments through an upload process into e-banking portals. So it's still kind of the conduit to the banks for transmitting files back and forth and payment instructions and things like that, right? So we're going to kind of focus on those, and obviously these tools have their place, and the reason why they've gained such a wide adoption. One is they're predominantly free, right? Everybody has access to these tools, e-banking portals and Excel and things like that, and Excel for one probably offers an unparalleled level of flexibility in terms of how you're visualizing your data, how you're preparing your reports, which a lot of companies like, right? So, but there are also a lot of drawbacks to using these tools and a lot of pitfalls organizations can fall into. So maybe we start our conversation here And John, maybe I'll go to you with this one in terms of what are some of the sort of the downfalls to using Excel and some of these manual, tools to manage these processes?
Yeah, I mean, I can speak to the cash forecasting conversations I've had over the last 2 years. I mean, so many companies that we talk to are all in the same predicament, which is, all these different pieces of my forecast puzzle, reside in a handful of systems, but none of those systems can create a usable forecast, right? So what do? You export everything to Excel, right? And then you pick one unlucky person, right, to turn this pile of spreadsheets into a meaningful forecast. But that's just not going to happen really in any kind of efficient or effective way without a tool that's dedicated to achieving that goal. So in the meantime, they live in spreadsheet hell.
Yeah, it makes sense. I mean, forecasting is definitely one of those processes that, you see a lot of companies spending a lot of time drawing different sources together, sort of normalizing that data, getting it into Excel, ultimately going through a lot of effort just to complete the action of creating a forecast, right? And that might take 3 to 4 days during the course of the week, and kind of negates the purpose of what a lot of companies use a forecast for, which is managing cash, managing liquidity, right? If you don't have a sort of a good view of what that what your cash position is, and ultimately what you might need to do for short-term borrowing needs, or what sort of cash investment opportunities might be out there for you. So that's definitely a huge drawback. And
the visibility is bad enough. Usually you go through all that effort, and you really can only be confident out like a day or two. I'd see even more than that is the timeliness. I mean, we've talked to quite a few companies that by the time they're finished putting all of that together, it's out of date. I mean, how frustrating is that to spend all that work and then you can't even use it because you're behind the curve.
That's true. It's true. Yeah, for sure. And Said, I don't know if you have any opinions on some of these other processes, bank account management, cash reporting type processes as well.
Yeah, main thing is that it's really not scalable, and it's tough to control and have an audit trail around it and be able to kind of show how things have evolved over time. And John Kane, I think you put it in a great way. It's some core SAP's job to be able to maintain all these Excel sheets and consolidate databases, and it takes a lot of time, rather than if you had one system, one single source of truth that is controllable. Maybe you have workflows around the management or updates of that data and are able to use a system to maybe update your other systems, so you truly do have that single source of truth. It just becomes a much more scalable, controllable, much more efficient process.
Yeah, agreed. I think bank account management, for one, is one that it's probably easy for companies to sort of default to Excel for management of that. Because what is bank account management? Well, at a basic level, it's just a list of your bank accounts, right? All the accounts that are open and their statuses and the signatories associated with them, right? So a lot of companies do just say, hey, we'll just maintain that within Excel. We'll just list those accounts out there. But the challenges come, and I think every Treasury organization faces this come audit time, or when you're trying to complete your FBAR filings or whatever it might be. Is that list actually up to date? Did somebody actually go in and add the most recent accounts that you opened back in November? Did anybody process those signature changes and update the signatories on that record, right? There's just no version control. There's no way to know if those records are right. So you can't rely on them for that perspective. And I know back in my Treasury days, we were always doing, before we handed that list off to anybody, we were always doing our own sort of internal audit to make sure that list was correct. And so obviously that's something that's really solved well with technology to be able to, sort of force that version control and that auditability of those records as well. And then you forget that, also there are other people in the organization relying on those BAM records. So, accounting needs those to be able to make sure that all of your cash accounts are correctly reflected on the GL. And, how's that information getting passed back and forth? If your records are out of date, their records might be out of date, which impact financial records. And then that's a whole new slew of sort of issues there, So yeah, so quite a few kind of pitfalls organizations run into. I don't know, John, Said, if we hit them all, or if you guys have anything else, but those are the ones that are kind of top of mind for me.
Yeah, I can think of another. I mean, obviously manual effort, time consuming, prone to errors, no security, no validation, no auditing. It's like, what else do you need? But one of the things I've seen that I'm sure you guys have as well is, over time, these, spreadsheet as a system, it grows and grows, and you add more pivot tables and more macros and more references. And one of the things I've seen countless times is an Excel guru is the one putting all of this together, right? One person who knows how it all works behind the scenes. And what happens? Well, they leave the company, right? And it puts the rest of the team in a really tough position to maintain that, quote unquote system.
Yeah. What do we refer to that as? Key man risk? Like that's definitely a consideration for companies is, so how does the continuity of that process continue if you do lose one of those key people? So so maybe we can pivot here and talk a little bit about, so if small companies are a little bit behind the technology curve, why is that? Is it just a lack of desire to implement technologies, or are they facing sort of, I guess, specific constraints to this segment that are sort of limiting their ability to invest in tech projects? I don't know, maybe I'll open this up to either of you guys to see, if you have any thoughts on why this is sort of how things have kind of come to fruition.
Yeah, I'm happy to start us off here. So, typically what I've seen is for, some smaller scaling treasury groups, when they're looking at the options out there, they get really overwhelmed, with some of these big players who, don't have an offering that's for their specific need, but maybe have this breadth package of modules that, they need to purchase if they want just even one specific module here. So it can be very, very overwhelming. And what I've seen is folks kind of going more towards this, what we call like best of breed approach, looking for technologies that don't kind of cover every single part of the treasury business, but maybe just those specific parts they need, like a reconciliation tool or a bank connectivity tool, and just looking at those parts, that solve everything, that has everything they need and nothing they don't. So, I think if treasurers and folks in this position, if they kind of take a step back and kind of reevaluate, what specific processes they're trying to solve and what's the highest priority to them, and look at maybe those systems that help them, get to that point right now, but would still set them up for the future, would make this a much easier, much less overwhelming process.
Agreed.
Yeah, I think that's a great sort of coverage of the the functional aspect of it, and of course there's budget constraints and IT issues. But one of the things I've run into a lot, especially when you're talking to that lean treasury team, right? That's just a couple of people covering a lot of different roles within treasury. I think there's a huge fear of implementing a new, even moderately complex solution, right? Because they have to continue to do their day jobs, right? And they're often doing that using legacy technology or a lack of technology. Either way, a situation that they're trying to move beyond, right? And they're having to do that while they have to gather data and make decisions on how they want to use the new solution. And it kind of reminds me of that phrase, like it's darkest before the dawn, because right before they go live and they transition to this like great new situation, they basically have to do everything twice in half the time. So I think just on that side, I think a good provider is really going to help them, understand ahead of time, what they need to do, what they need to do to prepare for an implementation, right? And then also do anything they can to sort of assist and make that process easier. Which you guys are well experienced at.
Yeah, when you talk about small treasury teams here, you might be talking about basically two people that make up the entire treasury department. So I feel like you heard that a lot, particularly like earlier in my career when, treasury management stations were called treasury workstations. You hear people say, we're not big enough for a treasury workstation. And what they meant by that was like, to configure that software back then that was on premise, it was highly customizable, right? It was, and you only had two people in the treasury department. It was, if somebody's spending all their time implementing this thing, who's doing the regular work that we have to do? And so if we're thinking about implementing technology, we might actually have added another resource, a third person, to just help out with the day-to-day so that we can get this thing up and running. And so then obviously the value proposition starts to diminish really, really quickly. And so that was a lot of what you were finding back in the day, I feel like, with constraints. Also, I think IT constraints, you see it across the board in every level of organization, but in small companies too, where maybe, I don't want to say Treasury's de-emphasized, but maybe there's a lot of competing priorities and Treasury's trying to get attention there. That's probably really a hard thing to get as well, right? And a lot of those legacy projects were very, very IT projects. Treasury had to face quite a bit as they tried to make the journey along that Treasury transformation curve. So
Yeah, John, to
Yeah.
add to your point, in my entire time within Treasury Advisory, I didn't work with one Treasury department that had dedicated IT resources who are available to help with, any sort of Treasury technology. And maybe that's why we're seeing this shift more towards, SaaS, software as a service, where IT is, less involved, and we put, the players out there are putting more power in the hands of the Treasury practitioners themselves, to be able to, implement a system or, look at their bank connectivity. So it's definitely very interesting how the market's been moving.
Yeah, I'd agree. And I kind of alluded to this point during the intro of the session here, but like between the three of us, I think we've seen a lot of different Treasury softwares. So just kind of curious what you guys think in terms of like how adequately do you think the software providers are addressing the needs of the small Treasury teams out there with their software offerings, right? Do you think there's some good tailored solutions out there? You think it's maybe an area that has been not really getting a lot of emphasis from the software providers over the years?
Yeah, I would agree with your last point. I think it hasn't really been getting as much attention from some of the software providers over the last few years. Even just kind of talking to people in my network or potential prospects, one thing I'm hearing is that even for these smaller, or scaling Treasury groups, that some of the software providers aren't able to provide a price point that works for them. You know what I mean? It's really, these packages are tailored towards maybe enterprise level companies, and so yeah, I've noticed, that's really been a key theme even with some of the bigger players out there. So recently, I've seen over the past few years the emergence of, I guess I'll say more affordable players in the space, which have kind of made it a little bit easier. But yeah, I definitely think it's a space that needs a little bit more care and attention.
Yeah, I think unfortunately, historically, a lot of providers really just try to put out a one size fits all approach, right? And that doesn't work for, a lot of companies, right? So, a lot of those companies, even sort of mid-market size, or smaller treasury teams, they'll buy the technology anyway, but then they won't fully utilize it, right? So now you're paying for it, you're not happy with it, you can't get away from it, or really make the case to get something new in place, right? And the providers themselves, they're going to tend to let sleeping dogs lie. So, if you're unhappy and waiting for your contract term to be up, the provider might not even really notice it, right? And then, what's the hope, right? Someday you get to start over again and hope it turns out better, And I think that's why, it's critical to really get to know the providers themselves and the pros and cons of each, well before you need to implement, any solution, right? Well before your hair is on fire.
John, yeah, that's a really great point. And to add on that, when I was in my consulting days, I found, I found myself and my team in a lot of those situations where, maybe a big scope was sold for a treasury technology, or maybe it was a smaller treasury group that didn't need, every single module. And then it just becomes kind of like a headache, for the customer to implement it. It becomes more expensive because they might not have the resources internally, and so they're working with consultants like I used to be, and that carries a heavy bill with that as well, and it just creates a lot of unhappiness, within the customer, and then it just doesn't create a good relationship with the software provider as well. And unfortunately, for those providers who are working, just with like third parties and maybe not being as involved in the implementation, it's really the consultants who get stuck with all of the complaints and everything like that, and being that kind of proxy between the customer and the software provider, which just creates a lot of unhappiness for everyone involved in the situation. So yeah, as you said, when you're looking for a provider, ask the questions, how involved would you be? Can you solve my specific needs? Is there a package that you can provide that doesn't provide everything you have, but maybe just the 2 or 3 things I need? A lot of important things to ask and consider when you're having these conversations.
Yeah, I think that's a huge question to ask, right? Are they generalists or are they specialists, right? The specialist is going to hang their hat on, 1 or 2 things they do really well. The generalist is going to want to cover as broad a functional spectrum as possible. And that's going to influence like their business model, their lead generation and qualification, their sales process, on and on to implementation and support, right? I think the specialist is going to want you to really use their product well and, tell others about it, right? Because they're likely smaller and they're trying to build up some market share. But I think the generalist is going to, want you to go live as soon as possible so they can move on to the next project. Not to be cynical. I mean, I think both models can serve the client, but you have to be careful not to fall by the wayside, and be one of those companies we talk to all the time that says, well, we use X system, but we don't use this module, that module, or the other module.
Yeah, I think you guys hit the nail on the head on that one. It seems like the way that software was developed and the capabilities that providers had to develop their software, they had to, do a one size fits all type solution. But fits all kind of means it's catered towards the organizations with more complexity because they're more likely to buy, right? They have the bigger problem to solve. And then what you immediately do, you kind of price out the small guys, the ones that are just looking for more foundational cash management needs because they don't need all this functionality. There's no business case for them to invest that much in a technology solution, right? So it's certainly been an interesting dynamic in terms of how that market's been addressed over the years. So, but that being said, technology is moving in a different direction, or has steadily moved in a different direction to kind of enable more choices, I think, for small organizations. Like you have very big events like the advent of cloud technology, right? Cloud hosting models. Suddenly, you don't have to worry about installing, maintaining, software on premise, which wipes out a major IT component and a major IT maintenance component, makes things more accessible to small organizations. Likewise, SaaS, software as a service, you now have solutions that are basically delivered to a client pre-built. They just need to be configured to their expectations, right? You don't have these customizations, these heavy implementations that were so resource intensive back in the days, and really were driving a lot of the logic behind Treasury not wanting to adopt the solution because they didn't have the resources to actually implement it successfully, right? Also, a key reason why you're seeing a lot of failed implementations back in those days. So steady movement, kind of more enabling, technology, I guess, that was previously sort of reserved for enterprise and upper mid-market organizations to the small market. I don't know, you guys seen anything else that's helping to kind of smooth that transition or facilitate that transition?
I would echo it. I see, I think the rise of SaaS is really, it's guaranteed access, right, to the, the same technology, that the Fortune 500 Treasury teams are using. It guarantees that for the, that access to the mid-market crowd, right? And mostly that's because, pretty much every Treasury software provider, that has a critical mass of large clients, right? What's the next thing they think of is they want to go down market and start helping the smaller companies and the smaller teams enjoy the same benefits. Now I know I sort of, was dinging the big providers, a little bit on the last topic there, but here I think I would call out a little bit some of the smaller Treasury teams in the sense that I think it's a shame that some of these operations, I think what I've seen is sometimes they're afraid to evaluate some of these technologies because they think they can't afford them, or they, can't handle the onboarding process, right? All the things that we've just been talking about are problems, and also perceived problems. I think that could be an opportunity for them to be the start of a discussion on functional fit, commercial fit. But unfortunately, I think a lot of times, that discussion doesn't happen because these sort of smaller Treasury teams disqualify themselves, basically.
Mm.
Yeah, when talking about evolving technology and just how things are moving to help Treasury departments, one thing that comes to my mind is things are moving so quickly these days, and just yesterday, the big word on the street was blockchain, and EM, and now today it's APIs, and so I just have myself, every time these very fancy key themes come up, I just have myself, I find myself questioning, what's the real use case here? Do people, APIs are very, very fancy, you know what I mean? But, do you actually need an API, when you're considering your bank connectivity? Are APIs going to be something that, maybe we move past very, very quickly and just become obsolete? I think of the past or something that was big that maybe people aren't focusing on anymore, like blockchain, although I am seeing a resurgence of blockchain, so maybe that's not the best application. But yeah, there's been a lot of, it just looks like there's been a lot of evolving technology that's been more easily attainable by Treasury departments with maybe some of the smaller players out there. Another one I can think of is just, fraud prevention. Although it's not, historically been such a big focus point in this space, there's been a lot of interesting technology out there that's been developed on fraud prevention, looking at historical payment patterns and maybe calling anything out that looks like an abnormality. It's making it a lot easier for Treasury teams to kind of get on top of fraud prevention or maybe other processes where they don't have as much control over.
Yeah, no, I agree completely. And maybe thinking about a few more advancements in technology that's definitely helped the small organizations. I think just generally solutions becoming more modular. that was sort of a big game changer. You didn't have to buy the whole TMS solution anymore. You could just pick and choose the modules that you really wanted to use, which was nice. It had sort of pros and cons there in terms of how cohesively that software worked together. But also, I think the advent of sort of more specialized best of breed solutions has been positive for the market too, because you can say things like, I have a cash forecasting problem. I'm going to go out and get a cash forecasting product, versus solving your problem with a product category like a TMS and just trying to sort of fit that all together and, maybe expanding what was a simple project into sort of a full broad, treasury operations type transformation. So I think just generally the way that softwares are built, delivered, and how they're more focused these days have been good for companies. There's more choices out there, great. There's more competition, which is good for everybody, in terms of innovation and in terms of specific solutions being delivered to to certain segments of the market. There's more price pressure, I think, too, because of the competition. That's a good thing for the buyer. So there's a lot out there that's really swaying these things in the small company's favor, I think.
Yeah, it's crazy how 8 to 10 years ago, the narrative was really one size fits all. What's the one technology that's going to solve all of your problems? And now it's more about that best of breed approach. It really does make it a lot more, less barriers to entry, a lot more easily attainable, and it makes your kind of technology evolving path make a little bit more sense if you think about it. For growing treasury teams, they can focus on what's their priority right now, which for most treasury teams, it's probably getting off Excel, connecting to the banks, being able to get your bank accounts automatically. Once you have that, then you can, focus on the next thing you need, which is maybe cash forecasting or reconciliation, and then, go to the next thing. It really helps you kind of build upon all of the building blocks that you need to get to that future state best-in-class treasury department, rather than, having, paying for all these modules and then not using them until 1 or 2 years later. It's really great to see that the market's been moving in that way.
Yeah, and that actually brings me to another point I want to get you guys' take on. Like, if we're going to give some people some sort of practical advice about how to approach this, like, what should you do first? Like, should you just round up a bunch of providers and start interviewing them, or whatever it might be, or sort of what's the approach to kind of kicking off a project like this, or just identifying, your treasury transformation goals?
I'd say don't start by thinking in terms of what tools or category of tools are out there, right? Like, think in terms of what, specific informational or operational and process related problems that you want to solve. Then pick what you want. To Saeed's point, go out and look for what solves those problems. Tech providers know that if you like their product, that's great, but it doesn't mean you're willing to go fight for budget and resources to put, that particular solution in place. So find the tools that you feel that way about and start there. Generally though, I would also argue that like any tools that you're looking at that give you visibility into the data you already have, right? Even over sort of the short term, will help you sort of get the insights you need to make the case for more and broader solutions, right? So, which is sort of another way of saying, like, look for that that quick win that sets you up to win more later.
Yeah, to add, I would say, at TIS, I'm also involved in the sales and pre-sales process a bit, and I would say, the best conversations we have are when folks come to us saying, like, I need X, Y, and Z of my processes solved. How can you solve that? Rather than when folks come to us and say, hey, show me everything you got, and then I'll let you know what's a fit for me. It just becomes a much more focused, much more directed conversation, and we can talk about solving those specific needs they need. And I said this before, and it's something our CEO says, which I really love. It's look for something that has everything you need and nothing you don't.
Yeah, I'd agree with that too. And I really like the point about starting with the problem. Look at your internal operational processes and, like, what are you really looking to solve here? And then develop this roadmap in terms of how adequately different providers you go out and seek are actually helping you solve that problem. That's key, right? So you guys brought up a good point too about like not getting sort of too distracted about the marketing buzz about a lot of what's happening in the market now, right? So bank APIs are everywhere. You're going to see it everywhere in marketing buzz, and yeah, it's a great technology. It's a fantastic technology. It's not a new technology. APIs have been around forever, but the emerging use cases for Treasury practitioners are relatively new. But I think you need help in sort of understanding how those use cases apply to your particular problem, and that's an area that providers can really help with, is helping you on that journey to really understand these emerging technologies and how you sort of marry them with actual solutions to business problems, right? That's something we're trying to do a lot, I know, on a day-to-day basis. So definitely something to keep an eye on.
Sorry, go ahead, John.
I was just going to say real quick, I think that's another argument for, go out and get educated on what's out there before you actually need to put something in place, right? I think, a lot of times the sort of the peripheral folks that we talk to or work with, in the banks or in the consulting world, they do that as a matter of course because they want to be educated on what's available. I think it's a great approach for Treasury teams as well.
Agreed.
Yeah, and just to talk about APIs again, it's every time when I'm talking to prospects and it's brought up, I always kind of challenge a little bit and say, hey, why do you need an API? Because API, it's a great technology, and it's there's a lot of great use cases for it. Real-time updates on your balances, sending payments, right away, real-time within a millisecond of when they're entered. And really, the question I ask is, do you need bank balance reporting at very specific like minutes throughout the day, like 3:52 p.m., 12:30 p.m.? And if the answer to that is no, then I would say maybe look at one of the other connectivity options that are maybe a little bit easier and take a little bit less time to connect to. Because if you don't need that very specific reporting at that very specific minute throughout the day, maybe APIs, although they're nice and shiny and you can get your information right now, maybe they don't solve any use case for you and are just kind of a nice to have rather than a need to have.
Yeah, and I was thinking we make an attempt here to give sort of a more generalized, if you're going to start somewhere, say you're just totally on e-banking portals and Excel, right? You have no technology and you have to start somewhere, where would it be? And this is obviously a very subjective question. It's going to differ based on organizations. But John, I think you made a really good point about figuring out where the quick wins are, what's going to show upper management that there's value in having this technology and sort of fuel your case for continuing to build on this path. And I always think just cash visibility is absolutely critical, right? Because there's so much you can do with just cash visibility. And I mean like some sort of automated feed of your cash positions and cash balance transactions and things like that, that's feeding into a tool that lets you analyze them and draw insights from them, because there's so much you can do with just that. You can make better borrowing decisions on a week over week basis. You can make better decisions with your short-term cash investments, or if you have a supply chain financing program, you can make better decisions about how to use those, or even make sort of suggestions to the business about how you might be able to use programs like that. So it's always a great place to start, and it's really foundational to a lot of other Treasury automations, the way that I see it. So if you have your information coming in automatically from a bank standpoint, that helps with actuals for your cash forecast. Obviously, it helps with GL reconciliation to have that information coming in automatically, right? So it's a good building block for a lot of other core Treasury processes. But I don't know if you guys had any other thoughts on this topic.
Yeah, it's tough to operate and make payments if you don't know how much cash you have. That's kind of key and foundational. And it's just even, yeah. Just even from my experience, I know we're talking about non-enterprise level companies here, but even just at the enterprise level, again, I'm talking about back in my Treasury consulting days. It was crazy to see just the level of cash visibility being so low for so many enterprise level companies as well, and really just kind of that should be, John, as you said, as both John said, a first priority building block. Then once you have your cash visibility, once you know your cash levels, then you can start doing fun and interesting things with that cash, in addition to just making payments.
Yep.
I guess there's always forces that fight against that, right? If you're a growth company and you're doing acquisitions, or you're moving into new markets, right? Like as you're trying to contain, all the data you need to sort of have that, okay, where am I today? Let alone where am I going to be a week from now? I guess that growth, which you want, which is great, that's always gonna fight you a bit. in terms of putting that together. So I think that's a big challenge, right? Is how do you sort of keep up with that growth, or maybe even how do you set yourself up to get ahead of that growth, so that when something new comes up, you can just sort of onboard it to the existing processes and technology, get down the road.
Yep.
Treasurers and treasury departments, first and foremost are stewards of cash, so if you're looking to, be a better strategic partner to the business, cash visibility is always a good first place to start.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a good point to maybe dovetail into another sort of topic we wanted to bring into this conversation. So we definitely wanted to discuss a lot of these points from the small company perspective, but also from the scaling company perspective as you're sort of scaling up the treasury operations as well. And even you could discuss this from an implementations perspective for small companies too. It's I think one of the values of technology these days is you don't have to necessarily implement everything at once. You don't have to jump to the final solution. Right. Do this in phases. You can kind of progress along this journey, either in a particular category, like cash forecasting, for example, or more broadly as you're building technology to be able to enable all your treasury processes end to end. It's not just build a TMS and implement 6 modules at the same time anymore. There's different approaches. So maybe we could talk a bit about that. And John, I know you've done a ton of work around this in the cash forecasting space in terms of helping people progress along their journey from the very simplistic to the AI-based cash forecasting that you get at the far end of the spectrum. So love to get your thoughts on that. So.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, sure. You talk to people and you show them what the dream state could be, and it's like, all right, how do we get there? And it's like, well, that's going to take a bit of time and a bit of work to get there. But to sort of help people get started, in the past, we've offered a what we call a walk, run, fly approach, right? And so focusing just sort of on that walk approach, the idea there is, we may not be able to out of the gate fully eliminate the spreadsheets, but at least, let's start focusing on repurposing that spreadsheet data, right? And getting it fed into the tools so you can start using the technology right now. You can at least get something like a forecast loaded, and now, you can do some review and analysis, you can, do some variance and enjoy sort of the outputs that you would get. And again, it goes back to that concept of the quick win, right? That's the goal, so that you can make the case to do more, later, to say, okay, here's the insights we've gotten with just this little bit of effort, of getting our existing spreadsheet data formatted into this tool. So we've gotten visibility now with those basic inputs. You could start painting the picture. Well, geez, here's what else we could do if we, bring in some of these other, larger, but more, I don't know, more meaty, more substantive informational sources into the product, sort of a building block approach.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I would agree with that 100%. And even in terms of just sort of, getting on a tool and starting to learn about your business, just because you have your data in a place you can actually value in that alone, even if you're not to your end state, your perfect forecasting process. We talked a little at the beginning about if you're spending 3, 4, 5 days just preparing a cash forecast, and the whole thing could be wrong because somebody messed up converting the CSV file right. for B of A or whatever, right? And that's throwing all sorts of variances into your forecast. It's like you're not really accomplishing much from a sort of an analytics perspective, from an insights perspective. You're just trying to get a report together, right? So even if you have a very basic cash forecasting process and you're loading that data in there, and you can start to see trends, you can start to see, hey, this forecasting logic, but it doesn't make a whole lot of sense, and you just start to draw all these different insights immediately into the business. So just jumping in has value in itself.
Maybe that's the upside maybe to the spreadsheets for that walk process, right? Because you might have different entities on different ERPs or whatever for that data, but everybody's still got the spreadsheets, right? So they're you're starting with that's universal. So at least you can get all that data in, and then all of a sudden say, hey, this this entity or this or this customer or this sales team or this region is problematic. How do we fix that? And oh, great, the tool helped us to do that.
Yeah. I think it's also kind of interesting to see too how the right technology solutions can also supplement some of these resource gaps that become big barriers to implementation projects. For example, making bank connections is a complicated action, right? Maybe your internal IT department doesn't have knowledge on that or the bandwidth to tackle it, but we've seen people who didn't even know what an electronic bank statement file was become experts on bank connectivity just because you put the right tool in their hands and they, have something they can use to manage it. So, Saeed, I know you've probably seen a lot of instances like this where people have just sort of taken off from a technology perspective, and suddenly they're able to support the business in ways that, that other resources really couldn't before that technology was in place. So.
Yeah, it's amazing once you give folks like the right tools, the right enablement, how much they can do, and how much more value they can provide to the business just through managing and maintaining, these connections and the data, and it just becomes a much easier process. We're talking about quick wins, low-hanging fruit here, and that's one of them. Just being able to easily view, your bank connectivity status, or our payments going to the bank. One other thing I would add there is kind of within the theme that you were talking about, John Kane, just kind of moving off spreadsheets and consolidation. I'd say that's kind of the same, some of the same low-hanging fruit, quick wins, even from the payments, bank account management, bank connectivity side. A lot of our customers, some of the first quick wins that they encounter are just consolidating their bank portals. It's a term that one of my colleagues like to use. It's one portal to rule them all. So moving off of all these manual bank portals and just having all that information go through one portal really just gives you a lot more control and visibility over that whole process.
No, agreed. I think another thing too is when you look at the team members within that lean treasury team, right? You start putting these tools in place that, like you said, empower them. Well, one of the key benefits you get out of the gate is you pull them out of marinating in these manual processes that take up all their time, right? So what are the high level initiatives that you can sort of get them to help you undertake, right? And get on that strategic level and start thinking out 6 months, 12 months, 18 months. You get so much more value add out of the people if they have the right tools.
Yeah. And to bring it back to one of the points we were talking about earlier, I mean, it helps reduce the reliance on IT. We're never going to be free of IT's chains. Kidding a little bit, but it definitely helps things move along quicker without relying on additional IT resources, or even putting more on their plate, because as we all know, folks in IT are already busier than they should be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you could even take it, a little bit further than, that, in terms of, if you think about what enterprise level organizations are usually trying to accomplish with tech investments these days, they've been through the initial treasury transformations that were aimed at automation and, those actions, right? And now they're thinking more broadly in terms of their place in sort of the office of the CFO and how they can be a more strategic business partner within the organization. So they're not even thinking, hey, we're going to create a treasury forecast. They're thinking, how can these insights that we have enable the business to perform better, or help the AR department or the AP department or FP&A or whoever it might be, right? Trying to be this hub of data. And same thing for, sort of people with the right technology in their hands from the small enterprise standpoint. You don't have to sort of, go through that automation journey. You can probably jump right to that end state, because even from a, bank connectivity standpoint, like we said, if you have somebody internally who's become an expert on bank connectivity, they can then enable other parts of the business. They can go to payroll and say, hey, you guys are sending, CSV files through an e-banking portal. You could be doing, XML files and get real-time confirmations, and not have to worry about getting a phone call at midnight about a file rejected and nobody's payroll is going to settle tomorrow. And, just find all these different ways that they can then help the business. And, likewise, even use these tools for, just identifying business insights, inefficiencies within the business that are impacting cash flow. There's just a lot Treasury, could notice on a day-to-day basis, being sort of the gatekeepers of that cash, and, seeing what's happened with cash on a day-to-day basis. So. Yeah, maybe.
I'll just say completely agree, and yeah, this is all ways that Treasury can move from being a cost center to a profit center. I know that might be kind of a hard thing to believe right now, but everything don't forget that you just mentioned, it's easy to attribute a value saving to that. So these are all great ways that Treasury can continue to become a better strategic partner to the overall business.
Yeah, I've seen it on the forecasting side, getting that forecasting and working capital insights are definitely an area too, where you can elevate to that strategic level. And really that's through, I think, operational improvements, right? You can gather and analyze that data, and then you could, go back to the operation and have some evidence-based discussions, across the business, and figure out, why is there variance in the forecast? Like, why were we off? Why are there gaps in the data? Why are there issues with data availability or data timing, right? So you uncover trends in that data, sort of drill into the detail level, and figure out exactly what's happening. By collaborating with these other teams, you can really, help the operation think on a higher level, than they are currently.
Yeah, I agree completely. I mean, just if you're not spending a lot of time creating reports, you're hopefully analyzing those reports. And if you're doing your variance analysis and you say, hey, cash receipts are off by 20% in comparison to projection, why was that? You start digging into it, you see, okay, DSO for this business line jumped 3-4 days. Something must be going on in the AR department. And suddenly you're having conversations outside of Treasury and you're really digging into real business problems. So definitely a good way that technology can help build that strategic case for Treasury. And maybe to kind of finish up here, this is kind of the last point I had on my talking agenda. Just maybe bringing it into 2023 here, given the economic climate, I guess, do you think there's certain topics that are probably on treasurers' minds more than others? And maybe we could even bring in a little bit of context in terms of how technology can help with that.
Yeah, cost, that's the first thing that comes to my mind, and the first thing that is coming up in a lot of the conversations I'm having with our prospects. It's going to be it's looking to be a pretty tough year economic wise, and so folks are looking to kind of save costs where they can. And with that in mind, looking at the more specialty providers, providers that solve maybe not the full breadth of Treasury technology, but those specific processes you need is a good starting point.
Yeah, I agree. I agree completely. I think in the conversations we've had, without them sort of coming out and saying it explicitly, it seems like a lot of treasurers are really thinking about like a coming economic contraction, right? And how do they deal with that? And that's as you said, it's affecting budget discussions, timing discussions, for putting a solution in place. But I think a lot of the treasurers are moving past that because they're thinking in terms of like, if that contraction comes, visibility into things like your banking relationships, your forecast, your AR, your AP, that's going to help you get through a tough time. And when will it come? But prediction seems to vary, day by day. But when it arrives is a bad time to say, okay, let's start the process of putting something in place to help us get through this.
Yeah, building a business case is going to be just so important in this year. I mean, it always is important, but it's even more emphasis on it this year.
Yeah, I think I'm seeing, kind of heavy emphasis on general sort of cash management, right? People have this acknowledgement, interest rates are rising, borrowing costs, the cost of debt's getting more expensive. It's a lot more important how we're using our cash on a week-over-week basis. We have to keep a closer eye on this, right? So I'm seeing topics like cash positioning, cash forecasting, to the point we brought up earlier, are there use cases around APIs? This is probably a good one, right? If people are really trying to manage cash more in real time to reduce their borrowing costs or identify short-term liquidity gaps that might be coming up on a week-over-week basis and how to address those, whether it's drawing on a short-term line of credit or if you have a supply chain financing or sort of a dynamic discounting or early pay program in place to tap into that. That's another way you could potentially do it. But I think people are really thinking about that. They're thinking about cash management and all the tools the market has kind of introduced over the years and how to put that whole picture together to kind of get most efficient from that perspective. So I'm actually kind of excited to see how this year turns out in terms of how technology progresses and what people kind of adopt during the course of the year. So
agreed.
Yeah, with that, I think that brings us to the end of our talking points. Really enjoyed the conversation, guys. We have about 10 minutes left here, so we're happy to stick on the line and answer any questions the group might have had. Maybe we'll bring Jen back on to see if anybody typed any questions into the chat during the course of the session here.
Sure thing. We had 5 questions come in. The first one came in from Bo, and I think it really touched upon a point, Said, you were talking about. Have you heard anything in the industry that could solve some of the reliance on bank portals for fraud prevention services? without this, there may not be a way to fully disconnect from bank portals.
Yeah, John P., I'm not sure if you might want to take this one. I know you've been heavily involved with these fraud prevention conversations with our banking partners.
Yeah, so I mean, there's a lot of software tools out there today that can proactively detect fraud before it gets to the bank, which is obviously ideal, you know. So there are a few different ways. I think most of the best practice organizations we're seeing are detecting fraud. One, through the vendor master maintenance, the vendor master scans, right? So most companies have an onboarding process, but we're seeing it kind of common for organizations to try to also leverage some sort of technology to do periodic checks on their vendor master to make sure you don't have a fraudulent record that happened to get in through a fake invoice attack or a fake wire instruction change request attack, right? And then two is at the point of payment initiation, sort of acting as, you know, call it like a firewall that's screening all your payment activity, looking for anomalies, looking for anything that might be suspicious about that payment activity. So TIS actually offers such a product as well, you know, a payment screening product that's able to screen all of your manually initiated payments, all your, you know, back office generated payments that might be originating from AP, for example, or even payroll related payments, to be able to detect abnormalities in those transactions, and then bring those to the user's attention to be able to decision say, hey, this is just a false positive. You know, there's a weird aspect of this transaction, but it's actually a legitimate account, a legitimate business transaction, or to be able to stop things before they actually get to the banks too, which is obviously ideal, right? So, and if you put a solution like that in place, you can, I think you can fully get off e-banking portals, right? So, you know, I know our solution in particular also aligns with our manual payments process within our platform itself. So our customers aren't making manual payments on e-banking portals; they're making them through our platform. They're then going through the screening tool before they go to the bank, right? So you have that protection in place there for manual payments as well. I'm sure the sort of the concern point there is probably business email compromise attacks, which is kind of the biggest risk to your manual payments process. So really designed to stop those threats as well.
Thanks so much, John. Okay, the next one comes in from Laddie. When it comes to SaaS for treasury operations, there would be challenges with the customization or customizing the solution to fit into your environment. How do you deal with that semi-automation?
Yeah, I'm happy to jump in. I mean, I think we see this tension a lot in the conversations we have. It's like, okay, you have a nice product that does 80 to 85% of what we want, but we have these Excel reports or dashboards that we've been using and that we like and that we don't, you know, want to give up. You know, so balance that against what a software as a service will provide, which is, you know, really a standardization of you know, of best practices, right? Learned from previous implementations that are often baked into the workflow of the system, right? So it may not be customized to your specific views, but you know, they're customized to the job that they're trying to do for a particular audience. So I would, you know, I'd recommend focusing on that a bit and you know, and why that's valuable, and you know, not necessarily disqualify those solutions based on specific output, you know, and maybe show the provider what you have, right? Help them understand it, explain why you like it. You know, that to me seems like a good start for getting where you want to be.
Mm-hmm. And one thing to add there is that you might be surprised, you know, some of the specialty smaller players out there might be more willing to work with you to kind of develop their platform to meet, you know, your customization needs. Is, you know, as long as you know, you guys can come up with a use case that helps, you know, fit not only you but also maybe other customers at that provider. You know, I found that providers would be in more cases than not more than willing to you know, agree to maybe additional developments or some sort of customization that would not only benefit you but also all the other customers within their base too.
Yeah, I'd agree with that too. So, you know, I think a lot of the times when we see customizations being requested, it's because the customer is trying to fit an old legacy process to a new software. And I think a lot of the softwares out there are designed to guide you into best practices. They should if they're well designed, right? So software implementation is kind of twofold. It's the software itself, but it's also the process redesign to hopefully get it to be in a better place. And if you think of it from that perspective, it's you know, 9 times out of 10 customizations aren't required. If they are, and you're working with sort of an agile developer like, you know, Saeed mentioned, if it's a great idea, I mean, the software company's probably gonna steal it and implement it and apply it across all of its customers anyway. So I mean, it's 9 times out of 10 you kind of end up in the same spot anyway. And there are a lot of benefits for SaaS in its sort of scalability from a development perspective, the way that it's upgraded and things like that. And we found as companies that have implemented software solutions and then done customizations to them, not our solution but other solutions, that customization kind of handcuffs them from a future upgradability standpoint, and they're stuck in a legacy version of the software forever because they've done these customizations. And that's not where anybody wants to be, particularly right now with how fast technology is changing, all the great things that are happening in the software market that are going to help treasurers. So
the next one comes in from Anthony. How do I get my IT team involved in undertaking technology investments?
That's $1 million question, right? I think everyone's still trying to figure out how to get their IT team more involved. But some things that I've seen is really, first of all, getting them involved in the conversations as early as possible. Even when you're just initially having the conversations with the vendors, and making sure to explicitly explain, when you're working with certain SaaS providers, that the IT involvement might not be as heavy as they're thinking, when it comes to on-premises solutions. So it becomes very important to just clarify with your software provider, what is going to be needed by IT. One thing we do when we kick off projects, we have kind of like a checklist and say, hey, this is everything that's going to be needed by your IT department, sent to them right now, so that there's no surprises later. Typically, it is less than what would be required with an on-premises solution. So I think if you can get them involved early so there's no surprises, and make sure that you explain that their entire life is not going to be taken up by this project, as long as that's true. That's an easy way to get them more involved.
Yeah, I agree with that 100%. They have about, as much as they can throw up roadblocks, right? They have multiple projects to juggle. They have some valid viewpoints here in terms of what they're trying to get done in terms of standardization, security across the organization. So yeah, absolutely, getting them, co-opting them into that process from the beginning, I think they're going to be much easier to work with. We've talked to certain companies so that when they ask about IT involvement, you say the answer is, well, they have to be involved at all. They sort of roll their eyes and say, oh, great, now we have to deal with that because our IT team is tough or busy or whatever, otherwise not what you would wish. But I'd submit that you both have valid points of view. If there's some rift between you, you gotta work that out and patch that relationship up, because if you do, right, I mean, that's the approach we take. We want to talk to IT on the first call, because get them up front, get them asking questions. We found the more we take them seriously, right, provide them with as much detailed information as possible as early as we can, the better. And if you think they have force behind them to stop you doing what you want to do, think about what you could get done if that same force is behind your project. It's like rocket fuel.
Yeah, I'd agree. And yeah, I'd say engage them early. They hate to be surprised by projects coming down the pipeline. Make sure you kind of have that good communication, and make sure they understand the full picture, because a lot of times with these projects, there's responsibilities that drop off IT's plate. There's, we implement now, but it saves you guys time in the future, right? If you even something as simple as, hey, we're migrating from a on-premise TMS to a cloud-based treasury solution. Now you guys no longer have to support this on-premise application anymore. You can drop it from your list, or if they're performing some custom data extractions and you're implementing a provider that can work with more standardized files, that's a huge benefit for IT as well. So there's good ways to make that case.
Great, thanks so much, guys. The next one comes in from David. I am part of a domestic business growing into new global markets. What considerations do I need to be aware of as I look for potential technology solutions?
I would say look at, when you look at providers, right, take a look at their client base, because I think that'll tell you a lot, right? Is it mostly domestic? Is it mostly global? I would posit that you'd want to see a client base that's a good mix, right? So if you're domestic, right, and you want to scale out globally, you have that opportunity. You need to make sure, within just as some examples, you need to make sure that you have the ability to use, things like FX rate data to do translation of amounts. you need to make sure it can handle, cross-border transactions or payments, different payment modalities. But at the same time, watch out for products that are structured exclusively for global use, because they might have a lot of features that you're not going to use for some time, but that you're still going to be, paying for, right? So, who do they emphasize, selling to, is going to impact their product roadmap, and the future functionality that you may or may not find useful. I think that's a key consideration.
Mm.
One question to ask yourself, is how can you identify, what you need to get the most bang for your buck out of? You know what I mean? What's the low-hanging fruit? What are your key priorities? Internally, before looking out at the market, understand what you're trying to solve for, what's the highest priority, and then keep that in mind when you're going to talk to software providers, and ask the important questions. How can you guys solve this specific process? And maybe compare price to how efficient these processes make you for different software providers, but really just asking yourself, what's your priority? What do you need to get the most bang for your buck out of these software providers?
Yeah, I'd agree with that too. I mean, both the points you guys made are really good ones, but like expanding into new markets usually means that there's going to be new business practices, and you may or may not have the internal knowledge to be able to manage those. It could be that you're moving into a market that has a complex payment system that you don't understand, right? And maybe you need to find a technology that kind of helps support you there. It could be that you're moving into a new market. Now you have all this currency risk exposure that you didn't have before, and you're going to be repatriating all this money back to USD, but there's P&L implications about that, right? And you want a tool that's going to help you manage that. So I think you need to understand that full picture as well, in terms of what you're going to need to kind of manage the business effectively, and before you kind of undertake that software journey.
Absolutely.
All right, great. And last question, I know we're coming up against time here, is from Gabby. How do I make the business case, and what factors should I include?
That's a great question. I think we said earlier, building a business case is going to be extremely important this year, given economic circumstances. And what factors should you include? Price. First of all, how much you're willing to spend to be able to get to that place you need. What processes are costing you the most amount of time? Which processes are the most inefficient? Like if you have one person whose entire day is working on spreadsheets and consolidating cash forecasts, then maybe cash forecasting is where you would realize the most efficiencies. Just ways that you can achieve your priorities in the quickest way. And again, I hate to repeat myself, but bring it back to what are the quick wins? What's the low-hanging fruit? Where can you get the most bang for your buck? Where's going to be the easiest way to show progress and value?
Yeah, and if the tool's going to help you sort of more efficiently manage cash, you can think about what's going to be the increase in your sort of short-term cash investment yield, what's going to be the reduction in your overall borrowing costs, right? But for more effective cash management, you can think a lot about this. Even from a pure reporting standpoint, I think that we kind of find that a lot of companies have complex bank account structures in place because they have no other way to be able to report cash otherwise than to hold an account for every single little activity and things like that. So if there's any simplification in your banking structure occurring as a result of it, that can be a big one too, that kind of lends into it. So but yeah, otherwise the ones Saeed brought up are great ones: the operational improvements, the resource reallocation to more strategic activities, which although it becomes tough to quantify, that can be a good business case as well. And also the minimization of the IT effort, which again is a tough one to quantify sometimes if you're eliminating IT efforts that are going on. But the numbers are huge. You'd be surprised how much IT is spending supporting a lot of business units out there, the Treasury Department and beyond too, for their processes. So I think those would be my suggestions.
Yeah, I think you hit on them all, both of you.
Okay, great. Everyone, thank you so much for your questions. John, and Saeed, thank you for all your answers and your time. Please note there are 2 handouts in the section for your download. And John, back to you.
All right, thanks again, Jen. Yeah, thanks everybody for those questions. Those were great questions. So, and John and Saeed, thanks so much for the time today. I really enjoyed the conversation. I think we covered a lot of ground here. So apologize, we went a little bit long here, but It was a good chat. And if anybody wants to continue the conversation, we're always happy to connect. Reach out to us on LinkedIn if you'd like to. We can connect, one-on-one to discuss any of these topics in more detail. But we hope to see you guys again on a future coffee talk, and thanks for tuning in.